Hi everyone, this is Cheryl and welcome to my sewing room. This is block number 3 of the Beginner's Botanical Quilt. There will be 9 different blocks in this quilt. To view all of the blocks in this quilt, play this video until a green screen appears and then click on the link in the upper left hand corner. Now use up your scraps before you buy any new fabric. I recommend you buy anywhere from 1/8 yard to 1/3 yard, or buy fat quarters if you do not have any scraps fabric to use. So let's get started. This is the block layout. It is a tulip or a flower, whatever you want to call it. It's a very basic tulip block. The letters inside of each area represents the color that you're going to use. So this pink area is, of course, the petal part of the flower, in which you can make it any color. You don't have to make it pink. The green, which is labeled by B, you can make it any shade of green that you want. And then C is your background fabric. I suggest you either just make it with white. I think that's a great way to start, is have all your blocks with a white background. But if you prefer a cream color, there's nothing wrong with that either. If you need instructions on how to cut quilt fabric, click on the link in the upper right-hand corner called Tips for Cutting Quilt Fabric. Here are the number of pieces you need for each color. The A, which is the flower petal, 1 4.5 inch square, 1 3.5 by 6.5 inch. B, the green stem and leaves, 1 4.5 inch square, 1 1.5 inch by 6.5 inch piece. Background, which is labeled by C, 2 4.5 inch squares, 2 3.5 by 6 inch, 2 3.5 by 6.5 inch, 2 3 inch by 3.5 inch. Take your 2 background squares that are 4.5 inch square. Draw lines from corner to corner. So line up those corners and draw a line on both of them. Place the white square or your background square on top of one of your green 4.5 inch squares and one of your tulip fabric A squares. Then on each of them, go over 1/4 inch on each side and stitch lines, and do that on both pieces. Then press the back side with your iron. After pressing, now cut them in half. Line it up on that drawn line and cut, and then do this one also and cut. Have the darkest fabric facing up, and then unfold it, and with your iron press this seam, pushing against this seam gently to get the seam to go towards your darkest fabric. So do that on all 4 of your half square triangles. After pressing, you're going to square all of them to size 3.5 inches square. Here's my quilting ruler. On all quilting rulers is a diagonal line that goes from corner to corner. These little sticky notes that I've put here highlight where my 3.5 inch line is, here and here. I'm going to center this area over my block. Place the diagonal line on the seam. Make sure you have fabric extending out here and here, and then over here. Now, cut 2 sides. Now I realize I'm left-handed, so you'll be doing it opposite of me. So now, take this corner and bring it over here. And line up that ruler, line up the diagonal line. Place the 3.5 inch line on the previous 2 cut edges, which are here and here. So I'm going to line it up. Still make sure the diagonal line is on your seam, and then cut 2 sides. Do this to all of your half square triangles. Before I start stitching everything together, I like to lay it out where it's going to go so that I don't get confused later. So in this first step, we're going to build this upper portion of the block first. So take your 2 half square triangles and we're going to stitch those together. So make sure they're placed like this, and now bring front sides together, and if you need to pin it, then go ahead and then stitch a 1/4 inch seam from this lower point here up to there. After stitching, press the seam on the back side and then unfold and press on top, just pushing the seam in one direction. Now you're going to take this 3.5 inch by 6.5 inch piece and bring it on top, and then stitch 1/4 inch up along this edge. Have this fabric piece facing up, press the seam on the back, then unfold and press on top, pushing this seam towards this piece of fabric. Stitch these 2 pieces to the sides along here. So bring front sides together and stitch a 1/4 inch. Then bring this one on top, front sides together, and stitch a 1/4 inch. After stitching, press both seams, unfold, and press on top, pushing these seams towards the sides. Next step is to start building this section in here. So start with the 2 squares down here and over here. Bring front sides together and stitch a 1/4 inch seam there. Take this one, front sides together, and stitch a 1/4 inch seam. Press the seams on the back side, unfold and press on top, and this one too, press on top, and the seams are going towards this direction. Now stitch these 2 pieces to this section down here. So bring front sides together and stitch a 1/4 inch seam, and then the same thing here, front sides together, stitch a 1/4 inch seam. Now press the seams on the back side, unfold both of them, and press on top, and the seam is going towards this piece of fabric. Last step here in this building this section is to bring on the stem. So just bring it on top of one of the sections and then stitch 1/4 inch seam. Press the seam on the back side, then unfold and press on top. Push this seam towards the stem fabric. Now bring the other side on top of the stem. Line it up, stitch a 1/4 inch seam. Now press the seam. Have the stem side facing up, the green here. Press on the back side, then unfold and press on top, pushing this seam towards the center here. Last step, very last step, is to now stitch these 2 sections together. So bring this on top, line up your edges, stitch a 1/4 inch seam along here. Have the tulip fabric facing up. Press the seam on the back side, unfold, press on top, pushing this seam here towards the tulip. Last step, to make sure that the block is close to 12.5 inches square, because that's what we're shooting for. This is why it's so important you have a 12.5 inch square ruler. Place it on top And at this point, now mine's not perfectly square, it's off a little bit, but there's enough there that I can still make this block work in the quilt. What you want to look for is, did this block come up extremely small or extremely large, way out here past your edges? Then you need to go back and figure out what happened. Either you didn't cut your fabric correctly, or your seam allowance was too narrow, or your seam allowance was too big. So if you're interested in learning about how to square a block, and I usually square the blocks at the very end when all my blocks are built, then I do the final squaring. So if you want to get a little jump ahead to see how that process is, click on the link in the upper right hand corner about how to square a quilt block. To view other quilt projects, play this video all the way to the end until a green screen appears, and then click on the links. If you like this video, please click on thumbs up, and also click on share to share this video with your friends. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then click on that red button down there in the lower right hand corner of your screen. Click on that little bell and then enter your email address so that you'll receive future email notifications about my latest video. If you don't seem to be receiving those notifications, go to your cell phone, click on Settings, and set notifications in the on position. I'm Cheryl. This is Manny. Thanks again for coming by. See you next time. Happy sewing!